Hello. So this is the first lecture of the chapter on early child development, or the topic of early child development. And if you have the textbook, if you have the 13th edition, that's the white textbook, we will be going, this is going to cover chapter 7 and chapter 8. In some places in the course material, it's called preschool years. Other places, it's called early childhood. That all refers to the same age range, somewhere between 3 and 5 and 6. So we'll talk about preschool and kindergarten in this section. I failed to get my little timer up, so let me get my timer started and we will get started. So in this lecture, we're going to talk about, well, I actually don't know how far we're going to get, but in this lecture, we're going to start off and talk about some of the physical changes during this time of life and maybe get to some of the early cognitive stuff. And again, as a form of disclosure, I am not an early childhood development person. If you are going into early childhood, no doubt you'll have a whole class where all you do is talk about children between the ages of 3 and 6. So again, we're just going to sort of talk about some of the big picture stuff and some of the changes. So I'm on page 195 in your textbook. If you turn there, you can see a breakdown of some of the physical changes that happen during this stage of life, specifically about height and weight. So your average 3-year-old girl is going to weigh a little bit less than 39 pounds, which is about what your boy's going to weigh too. Oh, I'm sorry, inches, 39 inches. Your girl's going to weigh about 34 pounds, and your boy is going to weigh just a little bit less than 34 pounds. By the time your child gets to 6, their average weight for a boy should be about 52 pounds, and the average weight for a girl should be about 48. It occurred to me the other day when I was out getting my walk about how much exercise parents of young children have, just the picking up of their children, right? Because you pick up a 3-year-old a lot, and just dead weighting 30 pounds off the ground over and over again over the course of a day, that's really good exercise. There's also a discussion in your book about, I thought it was in here about brain development, about brain size. This is also a period, because it's a period of such rapid development and rapid changes, sleep might get interrupted, or there might be some changes in a child's sleep patterns. As you know, if you've taken intro to psych class, especially the one that I teach, I've spent a lot of emphasis talking about sleep. Sleep is so important for your well-being. And one of the things that we see with neurological development and development in general is that when there's a lot of cognitive development or a lot of physical growth, you may see some behaviors during sleep that you don't see at other times. So this is the time of life where a child might experience something called night terrors. And I always say that night terrors are called terrors because they're terrifying for the caregivers, not necessarily for the children. But a child will wake up and they may yell, they may cry, they may scream out, and then they fall back asleep. Well, actually, they're not even really awake, but they appear to be awake. And so the parents will come running into the room, what's wrong, what's wrong, what's wrong? And then the child will just lay back down as if nothing happened. And in the morning, they don't remember it, they don't report it. That's what we mean by night terror. And so they're perfectly normal during this stage. And the thinking is that it just has to do with all of the different brain development that's happening. There's a good discussion in your textbook about some tips for helping small children sleep. And again, I don't want to sort of get too sidetracked by talking about the importance of sleep, but know that it's important for children to experience the full range of sleep, from what we call shortwave sleep to deep wave sleep, because it heals, or it works on, so a shorter wave sleep is implicated in physical body development or health, and then the deeper wave of sleep is implicated in sort of the neurological. But it offers some tips if you have children who have a hard time sleeping, and basically they're same as for you and me, and that is you need to prepare them for sleep, have a routine of sleep. If you're having a trouble going to sleep, perhaps consider, they suggest in here, maybe stay up a little bit later. when a child wakes up. This is also a time where you have sleepwalking. Is not that unusual during this period. Don't wake your child up when they sleepwalk. Carry them back to bed. Walk them back to bed. Same thing with night terrors. It's advised that you not wake a child up and say, "What were you dreaming about?" Right? Just let them sleep. Yeah. So anyway, and then so there's discussion about sleep. There's another thing that happens that's perfectly normal during this period too. Oh, I just learned how to pronounce it. It's the fancy word for bedwetting. Nurses. Oh golly, I just listened to it and I could say it just a minute ago. ENURESIS. You nursing students out there probably should learn that word. Commit the pronunciation to memory. But this is also a pretty normal phenomena. And so the thought is that the bladder's not like keeping up, but it's keeping up with the rest of the body's growth, or that this is likely to happen when a child is in really deep sleep. And of course, you know, for good parenting strategies, you should not shame your child, because again, this is a perfectly normal thing to happen. What's to say? Repeated involuntary urination at night by children old enough to be expected to have bladder control. And eventually they should overcome it, right? They should overcome it. And of course, there's some tips, there's some strategies that say you make sure they don't drink too much water late at night. Make sure they use the bathroom before they go to bed. Maybe wake them up once during the middle of the night. Make sure they go to the bathroom. But it's a perfectly normal thing that should pass on its own. There's also, of course, continual. We talked about in the last lecture, or in the last chapter, we talked about lateralization of the brain. And lateralization simply refers to the patterns that the brain is becoming increasingly specialized. And one of the phenomena that's coming out of this specialization of the brain is handedness, right? Right-handedness versus left-handedness. And it suggests that by the time a child is 3, it should be pretty clear what their handedness is. And thinking back to hopefully your general psychology class, you learned that the right hemisphere controls the left hand, the left side of the body. I think I'm doing it backwards. And the other, and so it's like cross. So the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, the right hemisphere controls the left side of the body. And so for handedness differences, if this is I want to say an organic one. So my father was left-handed, but he was left-handed because he'd had polio in his right hand and his right hand was paralyzed. That's not the same thing as if you were your natural handedness. And in one of the other textbooks I used, they actually made reference to ambidextrous children, people who really can use both hands, and it's thought to be correlated with like intelligence. I don't know. I didn't find any more support for that, and it's not discussed in your textbook. There's also a discussion in here about what's referred to as the nearly universal progression of art. And I didn't include all the different stages, but you can see an illustration of that on page 200. And what the researchers have suggesting or claiming is that children learn as they're developing their fine motor skills, right? That they do this in a series of progressions. So first they draw lines, right, crosses and circles. Then they get increasingly more complex. They call design stage, and then eventually they develop a pictorial stage somewhere between 4 and 5. But it's not like a child just suddenly sits down and starts drawing pictures, but it happens in a progression. Other things that are discussed in here are motor skills. So by about the age of 3, a child should be walking and jumping and having bladder control. Of course, this is a rough period of time. By the age of 4, it suggests that 20% of children can throw and catch a ball with some relative accuracy. And I added downhill skiing because one of the other textbooks I used talked about skiing. I think we took our daughter skiing for the first time when she was like 7 or 8, and boy, she could do it like out the poles, and woo, she was afraid of nothing. And then there are some who argue that this is too early for organized sports, for team sports, and that may have something to do with the development of theory of mind, and which we'll talk about later in this chapter too. But that may have more to do with our social understanding than with our physical and our motor. and some of our motor skills. There's a brief discussion about potty training. Actually, I don't know if it's actually in your textbook, but in another book that I was using, they were talking about potty training and how it's gotten later and later, right? So in 1957, people were potty training, children were potty training much earlier in the 18 months, but today it can go as long as 30 months. Well, that partly has to do with our physical comfort, right? The diapers in 1957 were probably not nearly as comfortable or as disposable or as easy to get as they were in 2020, right? And it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of continual interaction with your children, and if more parents, if children are spending more time with their parents because of the structure of society and the structure of work, that sort of makes some more sense. I think I'm going to stop this first lecture here, and when we come back, we will begin our conversation about immunizations and cognitive skills.